Hey, how's it going? I was just working on a couple shop projects here, and something came to mind. Something I had read when I was younger in $50 Knife Shop, I believe it was. And Wayne Goddard had stated, uh, basically to paraphrase, that there were some smiths who were creating neo-tribal knives, knives that didn't require any power tools for finishing. And I always, well, to produce and to finish. And I always found that interesting, especially from my background, which I did, I started out forging in a campfire when I was younger. And a lot of people are like, yeah, it's a bullshit story. Well, no, it's very much true. I didn't have much aside from a chunk of iron for an anvil and an old claw hammer and maybe some vice grips, or I think they were actually channel locks. Which, God, I wish I would have had some vice grips back then. But being able to take your raw materials and turn it into a first and foremost a serviceable blade, a tool, and then secondary, as skills develop with minimal available tooling, is something that is also aesthetically pleasing. So what I've got, a good example would be, maybe a blacksmith knife. Okay, this is pretty simple. You can file your bevel, file to clean your profile and to put your bevels in. Now, of course, this is one that I went ahead and used my 2x72 on, and then just kind of dirtied it up in comparison to this piece, which is a blacksmith knife. It's brute to forge and has a little better finishing, not great, but I sell a lot of those at shows. A lot of people buy them for souvenirs. So, as a result, I don't put a whole lot of work into those. Now, I do have blades that I put a lot of work into, basically to make them look like someone made them with very minimal tooling. Make sense? Let me walk you through it. Okay. So first, we'll go with some of my copper blades. Now, my daughter started making these out of old copper soldering irons, similar pieces, when she was younger because she couldn't move steel as easily. And, we'll piss some people off saying, oh, girls, lack of upper body strength, especially at 10 years old or something. Oh, okay. Well, the cool thing is she found her niche. She excelled at it, and she sold a lot of knives. She got out of it, so I started filling those orders, so to speak. And what I have is a blade that is still hammer marked, but it's been cleaned down so that it'll look better. It looks antiqued, but it doesn't look abused. Used but not abused. Actually, this has still got some Ren wax on it, I can see. This is one that I know on this one, I can tell just by looking at the surface. This is one that I actually smelted the copper into an ingot, then forged into a billet. A lot of people say, oh, you didn't smelt. Smelting's where you have to take, that raw material and turn it in. Yeah, that's kind of what I do for a living, people. I take raw materials and I turn them into blades. To the extent on the copper blades, many cases, not all, but in many cases of going through and, extracting usable material from ores, or from taking a portion of a previous run and remelting it, reforging, all that kinds of fun stuff. But anyway, getting back to the tribal bladesmith work, a lot of them are brute to forge finish. Now, is this a neo-tribal knife in appearance? I will say yes. Natural materials, natural binding, and a pretty primitive blade. Serviceable, yes. Visually, aesthetically pleasing. I like it. I think it's going to make a really cool neck knife. Somebody's going to love this. Now, with that being said, was this produced in a neo-tribal style? No, it was not. Because I used a gas forge. I used 2x72s. A fair amount of work went into that blade. That's buggy spring. These last three are buggy spring. This particular piece right here, now it does have a top edge, so that makes me look more modern in my opinion, but it is, this was an interrupted water quench actually. This is an antique spring steel. So I went oil, water, back and forth, only a few seconds in the water to get the hamon to pop just a little more, leaving the forge scale finish and going with some deer bone handle. I wanted something that looked even more rough and unrefined, and I think I found it. I mean, now this one does have a copper wash to it. This is antique buggy spring. It's copper washed. I left it in the acid, and turns out I was doing a melt on some copper. Apparently, it got enough of it in the air that it absorbed into my ferric chloride. I don't know what the hell it turned it into at that point with copper, but it produced a copper wash, which is kind of cool. Now, one thing, did it make a serviceable blade? Yes. Does it look old, worn? Yes, it does. Still use 2x72 on it and so forth, but I like creating the tribal style blades. Now this is ugly as sin. What can I say about this knife? Proportion wise, okay, it has a nice swell here. Excellent for slicing, for skinning, not so much for chopping. Tang is sizable. It runs down quite a ways. This was set with epoxy resin and then bound with the simulated sinew, and then resin over that so that it didn't fray and come all kinds of unwound and unraveled. However, can we turn something out similar to this with a campfire? Yes, we can. Can we turn something out better than this? Absolutely. Which brings me up to basically my next DVD that will be in production later this year. Quit Playing in the Damn Campfire, Introduction to Primitive In-Ground Forging. It's going to be minimal tooling, and I want to show you what you can do with that. In the meantime, I'm going to keep having fun turning out my tribal and Native American style blades. I like to think of these more as what a trade knife would have been, where they would have taken a blade that they could have set in as a spear or a gun stock war club, and set it into a bone handle so that they had a knife of sorts. So with that being said, tribal forging versus neo-tribal forging versus neo-tribal knife style. Neo-tribal forging, dig a hole in the ground, force air to a solid fuel source, coal, probably charcoal, hardwood, whatever the hell you can get a hold of there. Beat that blade out on a hard anvil-like surface and forge as close as possible to finish. Neo-tribal blades, knife making, making it look like you did that and did a good job at it. Okay. Working hard to make it look like you didn't. Right? Okay. So anyway, stay tuned. Like the page. I've got to hop off here because I've got some listings to make, and got some plans in the shop very shortly. So everybody, you have a great day. Like and subscribe.